My son thought he was giving me an ultimatum. He didn't realize he was signing his own eviction notice. And the moment he pointed to the door, I knew it wasn't mine. At family dinner, my son Daniel looked at me across the table and said, "Your job is simple, Mom. Watch the kids while we enjoy our life. If you don't like it, the door is right there." The room went silent. Forks paused midair. Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, stopped chewing. Liam and Mason, my grandchildren, looked between us. Isabella didn't blink. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just smiled. And I said, "Perfect." That's when the power shifted. But what Daniel didn't know, what Vanessa couldn't possibly imagine, was that I had been preparing for that moment for 6 weeks. If you think this story ends with me walking away hurt and defeated, stay with me, because sometimes silence is not surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. Dinner had been idea. She had set the table like it was a magazine shoot. White plates, linen napkins, candles that smelled like something expensive and unnecessary. She always did that when she wanted something. Daniel sat at the head of the table like he owned the air in the room. Corporate confidence. Polished smile. That subtle impatience he wore like cologne. I had made the roast. Of course I had. I always made the roast. Liam and Mason were arguing about whose math homework was harder. Isabella was quiet, observing the way she always did. That girl noticed everything. I noticed everything too, especially the tone Daniel used when he cleared his throat. "Mom," he began casually, not looking at me directly. "Vanessa and I have been talking." Vanessa gave a small, controlled smile. "We think it's time to clarify expectations." Clarify, such a clean word for something so ugly. I folded my napkin slowly and placed it on my lap. "Clarify what, Daniel?" He leaned back. "You live here, we cover utilities, groceries, mortgage. The least you can do is handle the kids full-time so Vanessa can travel with me when needed." Vanessa nodded. "It's really not that much to ask." Not that much. I had sold my home, my quiet, paid-off, peaceful home, because Daniel called one Tuesday afternoon and said, "Mom, we're drowning." He said Vanessa was overwhelmed. He said the boys needed stability. He said Isabella needed guidance. He said it would only be temporary. Temporary. 6 months later, I was waking at 5 in the morning to pack lunches, managing school calendars, cooking every meal, folding laundry, cleaning bathrooms, and staying up late to finish projects Isabella needed help with. And they were traveling a lot. Work trips, they said. Strange how work trips involve beachfront photos and champagne glasses. But I never said anything, because I was watching. Bookkeepers observe patterns, and patterns were everywhere. Daniel continued, "It's simple, Mom. This is your role now. You take care of the house and kids. We build our future." Vanessa added softly, "And if that's not something you're comfortable with," she let the sentence hang. Daniel finished it. "The door is right there." The air changed. You could feel it. Liam stopped swinging his legs. Mason looked confused. Isabella's eyes flicked to mine. She was waiting. Everyone was waiting. They expected tears. Maybe anger, maybe guilt. Instead, I smiled. "Perfect." Daniel blinked. "Perfect?" he repeated. "Yes," I said calmly. "That makes things very clear." Vanessa frowned slightly. I stood, not abruptly, not dramatically. Just with the same composure I used when balancing million-dollar ledgers 30 years ago. "I'll finish the dishes," I said softly. "We'll talk tomorrow." And I walked to the kitchen. Behind me, I heard Vanessa whisper, "What was that?" Daniel muttered, "She's bluffing." I almost laughed. "Bluffing? No, Daniel, I don't bluff, I calculate." What they didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier, I had noticed something unusual in the joint account Daniel insisted I open for household simplicity. Small withdrawals. Then larger ones, then transfers labeled temporary reallocation. I may be 71, but I am not confused. I was a bookkeeper for 42 years. I know what siphoning looks like. I said nothing. Instead, I called Harold Bennett. Harold specializes in estate and elder law. He doesn't shout. He doesn't threaten. He executes. I sat in his quiet office on a Wednesday morning while Vanessa thought I was at church. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said calmly, reviewing the documents, "you have granted more access than you realize." "I assumed so," I replied. "Do you wish to correct that?" I folded my hands. "Yes, quietly." And so we began. Account restructuring, access limitations, beneficiary adjustments, power of attorney revocation drafts, all silent, all legal, all precise. Because when people underestimate you, they rarely check the paperwork. Back at the dinner table, Daniel resumed eating as if the conversation was over. Vanessa reached for her wine, but Isabella was still watching me from across the room. Later that night, she knocked on my bedroom door. "Grandma, yes, sweetheart?" She stepped inside, closing the door gently. "You're not upset," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. "No," I replied. She studied my face. "They don't know you like I do." I smiled. "No, they don't." She hesitated. "Are you leaving?" I tilted my head. "Why would you ask that?" "Because when you said perfect, it didn't sound like you were agreeing." "Smart girl." "I won't do anything impulsive," I told her. That was true, I don't do impulsive. She nodded slowly, then she said something that confirmed everything I had suspected. "They've been talking about selling the house next year." My heart didn't race, it steadied. "Oh," I asked softly. "Yeah. Dad said once you're settled somewhere smaller, it'll be easier." Settled somewhere smaller, I see. I reached for her hand. "Thank you for telling me." She squeezed my fingers. "I don't like how they talk about you." I smiled again. "Neither do I." That night, after everyone slept, I opened my laptop, transferred the final remaining funds into the protected account Harold had established, revoked Daniel's secondary access, scheduled one more meeting. Because if my job was simple, then so was my next move. And Daniel was about to learn something very important. You never give a bookkeeper access to your life and assume she isn't keeping records. The next morning, something happened that confirmed I had made the right decision. But I didn't react. Not yet. Because timing is everything. And what Daniel discovered 48 hours later is what made him realize the door he pointed to was never mine. It was his, and he didn't even see it closing. The morning after the dinner ultimatum, the house felt different. Not louder, not colder, tighter, like the walls were waiting. Daniel left early as usual, suit pressed, coffee in a travel mug I had washed the night before. He avoided my eyes when he passed through the kitchen. Vanessa, however, lingered. She leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone, pretending the night before had been insignificant. "You were very dramatic yesterday," she said lightly, not looking up. "I didn't raise my voice," I replied, buttering toast for Liam and Mason. "Exactly," she said with a small smile. "That was the dramatic part." Ah. So that's how she saw it, silence as performance. Vanessa thrives on reaction, volume, emotion, public positioning. She doesn't understand restraint, but she would. Soon, the boys rushed in arguing about sneakers. Isabella followed, observant as ever. She looked at me briefly, searching for something. I gave her nothing. Because when you're executing a plan, you don't leak energy. By 9 a.m., the house was empty except for me. That's when I began the audit, not of finances, of behavior. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, the same kind I used when reconciling quarterly reports years ago. Across the top, I wrote patterns. Daniel's tone when asking versus demanding. Vanessa's timing when introducing discussions. Travel frequency aligned with account withdrawals. School pickup shifts increasingly assigned to me without consent. Language used. Role, expectation, temporary, family contribution. There's a difference between help and obligation, between gratitude and entitlement. And Daniel had crossed that line months ago. I just hadn't named it yet. But once you name something, you can manage it. At 11:30, my phone rang. Harold Bennett. "Mrs. Whittaker," he said calmly, "the restructuring is complete. And access? Restricted. Mr. Daniel Whittaker will notice if he attempts a transfer beyond the agreed household range." I allowed myself the smallest exhale. "And the secondary documents? Prepared. If you wish to execute them, you may." "Not yet." "Timing. Thank you, Harold." "One more thing," he added. "Based on the account pattern, there have been reclassifications under shared expense justification." I already knew. "Estimated amount?" I asked. "Just under $28,400 over 5 months." $28,400, withdrawn in pieces small enough not to trigger alarm. Hotel deposits, luxury dining, 2 airline upgrades. Designer retail purchases. Vanessa doesn't repeat outfits on social media, but she repeats patterns, and Daniel repeats excuses. I thanked Harold and ended the call. $28,400. Daniel called it family fluidity. I call it misallocation. That afternoon, Daniel texted me. "Daniel, we need to talk tonight." Me, of course. Daniel and Mom, please don't overreact again. I smiled at the screen. Overreact. Interesting word from a man who pointed to a door and expected obedience. Dinner was quieter that night. Vanessa didn't light candles. Daniel waited until the boys were in the living room before speaking. I thought about what you said, he began. I said perfect. I reminded him gently. Yes, that, it felt passive-aggressive. Passive aggression is emotional manipulation disguised as calm. What I was doing wasn't passive, it was procedural. I agreed with you, I said. That's the thing, he snapped slightly. You didn't argue, that makes it worse. Vanessa interjected smoothly. Gloria, we just need alignment. If you're living here, there needs to be structure. Structure. Another clean word. Of course, I said softly. Structure benefits everyone. Daniel leaned forward. So we're clear, you'll handle childcare and household responsibilities full-time. I met his eyes, and in exchange, Vanessa stiffened. Exchange, she repeated. Yes, I said. If we're defining roles formally, clarity goes both ways. Daniel frowned. We cover your living expenses. I tilted my head slightly. Daniel, I transferred $45,000 into the joint household account when I moved in. That was to help, he replied quickly. Correct, and I have helped. Silence. Vanessa's jaw tightened. This is ridiculous, she said. You're turning family into a contract? No, you did, I just read the fine print. I'm simply asking for transparency, I said gently. Daniel stood abruptly. You know what, forget it, we'll revisit this later. Translation. He felt cornered, good, not attacked. Cornered, there's a difference. Later that night, Isabella knocked again. They're nervous, she whispered. I can tell. Dad tried to log into the shared account earlier. He looked confused. Of course he did. I nodded slowly. He'll adjust. She studied me carefully. You're not scared of them? No. Why? Because fear disappears when leverage appears, but I didn't say that. Because I don't argue when I have documentation, I replied. She smiled slightly. Grandpa George used to say that. Yes, George, practical, firm, allergic to dependency. Financial independence, he would say, is the only real insurance policy. I should have remembered that sooner. The next morning, Daniel confronted me directly. I can't access the investment extension, he said flatly. That's correct, I replied, sipping tea. Why? Because it's not an extension. It's my retirement reserve. Vanessa entered mid-sentence. What's going on? Daniel gestured at me. She changed the account structure. Vanessa's eyes sharpened. You did that without discussing it? I looked at her calmly. You told me structure was important? The air snapped. You're being manipulative, she said. No, I replied softly. I'm being organized. Daniel's voice lowered. Mom, we've already allocated some of that money. Allocated. Not borrowed, not asked for, allocated. To Cancun? I asked quietly. Silence. Vanessa's face went pale for half a second. How do you? I was a bookkeeper for 42 years, I said gently. I read statements like novels. Daniel stared at me. You were spying on us. No, I said. I was reconciling discrepancies. Vanessa stepped closer. You moved the money. Yes. Without telling us. Yes. Daniel's voice hardened. You can't just destabilize our financial planning. I stood slowly. I didn't destabilize it, Daniel. I removed my portion. He looked stunned. Your portion? $28,400. Vanessa whispered, that can't be right. It is. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. We needed liquidity? For what? I asked calmly. Neither answered, because when entitlement meets documentation, volume fades. That evening, Daniel's tone changed. Less confident, more cautious. Vanessa avoided me entirely. The boys sensed tension but didn't understand it. Only Isabella understood. She sat beside me on the couch. They didn't think you were paying attention? No, I said softly. They didn't. She hesitated. What happens now? That was the right question, because this wasn't about money anymore. It was about positioning. I'm giving them time, I replied. For what? To decide whether they want a mother or a resource. And if they choose wrong. I didn't say it aloud, but I had already drafted the next step with Harold Bennett. Asset separation, housing leverage, estate reallocation, and something Daniel would never expect. Because the real shift wasn't the money, it was ownership. And Daniel had forgotten one very important detail about this house. A detail I had intentionally not corrected when I moved in. A detail buried in paperwork. A detail that would change everything. He thought I lived under his roof. He was wrong, and when he finds out, the dinner conversation will feel small, very small, but that revelation comes next. There is something fascinating about confidence built on assumption. It looks solid. It sounds authoritative. It even feels permanent, until paperwork speaks. The morning after Daniel confronted me about the account restrictions, he left the house without his usual sharp efficiency. His tie was slightly crooked, his steps were faster than necessary. Vanessa watched him from the kitchen window. "He didn't sleep," she said quietly. "Financial stress does that," I replied, rinsing my teacup. Her eyes flicked toward me. "You didn't have to escalate this." "I reorganized my retirement," I said gently. "That isn't escalation." She turned fully now. "You know what you're doing." Yes, the honesty startled her. Vanessa thrives in ambiguity. In polite vagueness, in plausible deniability, direct acknowledgement unsettles her. "You're trying to teach us a lesson," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm correcting a pattern." She stared at me for a long moment. "You think we're irresponsible?" I met her gaze evenly. "I think you've been comfortable." That hit harder than accusation, because comfort suggests dependency, and Vanessa prides herself on appearing self-sufficient. By noon, Daniel called. His voice was clipped. "Mom, we need to talk tonight, properly?" "Of course. And bring any paperwork you've changed." Interesting, he thought this was a negotiation. It wasn't, it was a disclosure. That afternoon, I made another call. "Harold," I said calmly, "it's time." "I suspected as much," Harold Bennett replied. "Have the copies ready." "They already are." That is why I work with people who prepare quietly. Dinner was tense again, the boys sensed it. They ate quickly and escaped to the living room. Isabella lingered longer than usual, pretending to scroll on her phone. Daniel cleared his throat. "Let's settle this." Vanessa folded her hands in front of her like a mediator. "Gloria, if there's confusion about contributions, we can draft a household agreement." There it was again, contract language, control disguised as fairness. I placed a folder on the table, cream-colored, unremarkable. Daniel frowned. "What's that?" "Clarity," I said. He opened it, and the color drained from his face. Vanessa leaned over his shoulder. "What is that?" Daniel didn't answer immediately because he was reading, and what he was reading was not what he expected. "This deed, this can't be right." "It is," I said softly. "The house was never Daniel's, not entirely. When George passed, the property structure shifted into a living trust. A structure Daniel signed years ago without reading thoroughly because Dad handled that stuff. George believed in documentation, and I believed in listening. The trust granted Daniel usage rights, but ownership remained under controlled distribution, under me. I had allowed Daniel to speak as if this was his house. I never corrected him, because sometimes the most effective leverage is silence." Vanessa's voice sharpened. "What does this mean?" "It means," I replied gently, "that I do not live under Daniel's roof." Daniel looked up slowly. "You're saying you own this house?" "I control the trust," I clarified. Vanessa stepped back as if the room had shifted beneath her. "That's impossible, we've been paying the mortgage." "There is no mortgage," I said, silence heavy. Daniel blinked. "No mortgage? George paid it off 12 years ago." Vanessa stared at him. "You told me, I assumed," Daniel started, then stopped. "Assumptions, the foundation of entitlement." I folded my hands calmly. "You have been contributing to household utilities and renovations," I said. "That is appreciated." Daniel looked almost dizzy. "You let us think this was ours." "I let you speak without interruption." "That's different." Vanessa's composure cracked slightly. "This is manipulation." "No," I replied softly. "This is structure." Daniel slammed the folder shut. "You're threatening to throw us out?" "I haven't threatened anything." "But you could," Vanessa said quietly. "Yes, I could." And now they knew it. Isabella had stopped pretending to scroll. Her eyes were wide. She understood faster than either of them. Power had shifted, not emotionally, legally. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "So what now?" he asked, voice low. "Now," I said calmly, "we redefine terms." Vanessa laughed bitterly. "You're enjoying this." "No, I was executing it." "I am ensuring sustainability," I replied. Daniel rubbed his temples. "You're cornering us." "No," I said. "I'm removing confusion." Vanessa crossed her arms. If this house is technically under your control, what are you implying? I met her gaze. I'm implying that we need a written agreement. Her eyebrows rose. You accused us of turning family into contracts. Yes, I said softly, and I've decided contracts are wise. Daniel's laugh was hollow. So what, you charge us rent now? Fair market contribution, I replied. Vanessa stood. This is insane. No, I said evenly, it's balanced. Daniel's voice sharpened. We've built our lives here, and I've funded part of it, I reminded him. Silence. The weight of math is heavier than emotion. That night I heard them arguing behind their bedroom door, low voices, accusations. You said it was ours. You never asked. She moved the money. She can't just, she can. Yes, I can. The next morning, Daniel was different. Less aggressive, more cautious, he entered the kitchen quietly. We need time, he said. You have it. And you won't do anything drastic? I poured tea slowly. That depends on definitions. Vanessa entered seconds later. We've spoken to our financial advisor. Of course they had. And, I asked. He says restructuring ownership at this stage is disruptive. Ownership isn't being restructured, I replied. It's being clarified. Daniel's jaw tightened. You should have told us. I assumed you read what you signed. Vanessa's eyes flashed. You're punishing us. I'm protecting myself. Daniel's voice softened. Mom, are you trying to leave? There it was, fear, not of losing me, of losing control. I haven't decided, I said truthfully, and that uncertainty unsettled them more than any declaration would have. That afternoon, Isabella knocked again. They didn't know, she whispered. No, they thought you were dependent. I was quiet. She smiled slightly. That's different. She hesitated. Are we moving? I studied her carefully. Do you want to? She thought about that longer than a 17-year-old usually would. I want stability, she said finally. So did I, but stability requires respect. By evening, Daniel requested another discussion. No raised voice this time, just tension. We can pay you monthly, he said. Amount? I asked. Vanessa named a number. Low, too low. I slid a printed sheet across the table. Fair market calculation, utilities, maintenance, opportunity cost. Daniel stared at the figure. That's steep. It's accurate. Vanessa leaned back. You're serious? Yes. Daniel looked up slowly. And if we refuse, I held his gaze, then you will need alternative housing. The words landed quietly, but they landed. Daniel's face shifted from frustration to something else. Calculation, he was realizing something bigger. Relocation would expose their finances. Vanessa's lifestyle relies on optics. Moving abruptly would raise questions, and Daniel's corporate image thrives on stability. They couldn't afford upheaval, and I knew it, because I had audited more than numbers. I had audited ego. Later that night, Daniel attempted something different. Softness. He came to my room. Mom, he said quietly. Yes, you could have just talked to me. I tried. He looked away. You didn't threaten before. I didn't need to. Silence. He swallowed. Are you trying to dismantle us? I looked at him carefully. No, Daniel. I'm trying to stop being dismantled. That sat heavier than anything else I'd said. He left without arguing, but there was something else he didn't know. The trust structure had a clause, one he had never bothered to read. A clause triggered by financial mismanagement or exploitation. And Harold had already drafted the activation paperwork. If I signed it, Daniel wouldn't just lose authority over the house. He would lose access entirely. I hadn't decided yet, because power is strongest when unused. But Daniel's next move would determine everything. And judging by the expression I saw when he checked his email late that night, he had just discovered something else. Something tied to his corporate account. Something Harold and I adjusted quietly last week. The trust didn't just control the house. It held partial collateral linked to Daniel's business guarantee. And if he pushed me again, his professional life wouldn't just feel pressure, it would feel consequence. He doesn't know that yet, but he will. And when he realizes how interconnected everything truly is, the dinner ultimatum will look like a minor mistake. Because this is structural, and structures either stand or collapse. Power doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives as a notification. Daniel discovered it at 11:42 p.m. I know the exact time because I heard the sharp intake of breath from down the hallway. There is a particular silence that follows panic. It's not dramatic. It's contained, measured, like someone trying not to wake the house while their world tilts. That was the sound. The next morning, Daniel did not stride into the kitchen like he usually did. He entered slowly, already dressed for work, tie perfectly aligned, but something behind his eyes had shifted. Vanessa followed a moment later. Her makeup was flawless, her composure was not. I poured my tea as usual. "Good morning," I said gently. Daniel cleared his throat. "We need to talk." Again, but this time there was no authority in his voice, only urgency. I gestured to the chair across from me. He didn't sit immediately. "What did you do?" he asked. Such an interesting choice of words. Not "what happened," not "can we discuss something," "what did you do?" I looked at him calmly. "I reorganized risk." Vanessa stiffened. "Risk to whom?" she asked. "To anyone connected to me financially." Daniel exhaled sharply. "You restructured the trust." "Yes, and you triggered a review clause." "Yes." Vanessa's hand gripped the counter. "What review clause?" Daniel didn't answer her, because he was still reading it in his mind. "Years ago, when George and I established the trust, Harold insisted on protective contingencies. If a beneficiary displayed financial instability or attempted coercive access to principal funds, asset shields could be activated. Daniel signed those documents at 32. He skimmed them. He trusted that George handled it. George did handle it. That was the problem." Daniel leaned forward. "That clause impacts my corporate collateral line." "Yes." Vanessa's head snapped toward him. "Your what?" Daniel ignored her. "You tied my professional guarantee to the trust's stability." "No," I corrected gently. "You did." His jaw tightened, because he remembered. He had used the house's valuation years ago to strengthen his executive credit profile. He believed it was his asset. Technically, it wasn't. Vanessa's voice dropped. "What does this mean?" Daniel answered quietly. "If the trust flags instability, the bank reassesses exposure." "And," she whispered, "and I lose leverage." There it was. Not bankruptcy, not disaster, but vulnerability, and Daniel cannot tolerate vulnerability. I folded my hands. "I did not initiate removal," I said calmly. "Only review." Vanessa stared at me as if I'd revealed a second face. "You planned this." "No," I replied softly. "I prepared for possibilities." Daniel paced once across the kitchen. "You could have destroyed my position." "I still could." Silence, not loud, not explosive, just heavy. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "So this is about control?" "No," I said, "this is about consequence." Daniel stopped pacing. "What do you want?" Such a simple question, such a late one. "I want clarity," I said. Vanessa laughed under her breath. "You keep saying that." "Yes. Clarity about what?" "Authority, contribution. Respect." Daniel dragged a hand down his face. "You're risking my career. I am safeguarding my estate." Vanessa crossed her arms. "You think we're exploiting you?" I met her gaze evenly. "I think you stopped seeing me." That landed harder than accusation, because invisibility is more dangerous than conflict. The boys entered the kitchen then. Liam first, Mason right behind him. They sensed tension immediately. "Children always do." Daniel forced a smile. "Morning, champs." Liam looked between us. "Are we okay?" Vanessa moved quickly to kiss his head. "Of course we are." I watched her carefully. Her tone was polished. Her eyes were calculating. Later that afternoon, I received a call. "Harold, they've contacted the bank," he said. "I assumed they would. They're requesting clarification." "Did you respond?" "Not yet." "Wait," I said. "Are you certain?" Harold asked. "Yes, because waiting is pressure, and pressure reveals character." Daniel returned home earlier than usual, no celebratory tone, no confident stride. He walked directly into my sitting room. "We need resolution. You have options. Withdraw the review, under conditions." Vanessa appeared in the doorway. "This is blackmail." "No," I said calmly, "it's boundary enforcement." Daniel's voice dropped lower. "What conditions?" I stood slowly and walked to the window before answering. "I will not be spoken to as if I am hired staff." Silence. "I will not be financially entangled without documentation." Vanessa's lips tightened. "And you will sign a residential agreement." Daniel laughed once. "In my own house." I turned. "Careful." He stopped laughing. Vanessa stepped forward. "And if we refuse?" "The review remains active." Daniel looked at her. She looked at him. For the first time, I saw fear without arrogance because they finally understood something. I was not reacting emotionally, I was operating strategically. That evening, Isabella came to my room. "They're scared," she said quietly. "Yes, are you trying to ruin them?" "No, then what?" "I am forcing them to operate honestly." She studied me. "Dad always says you don't understand modern pressure." I almost smiled. "Pressure is not new. It just changes clothes." She nodded slowly. "I think you're the only one not pretending." That sentence stayed with me long after she left. By the next morning, Daniel had scheduled a meeting with Harold, not through me, directly. "Interesting," Harold called to inform me he's requesting explanation. "Give him facts," I said, "and if he attempts to argue, remind him he signed willingly." Harold paused. "He's unsettled, I know, and Vanessa, more dangerous when calm," I replied. Harold chuckled lightly. "You haven't lost your precision." "No," I said, "I simply stopped hiding it." The meeting lasted 90 minutes. Daniel returned pale. Vanessa questioned him immediately. Well, he didn't answer right away because he understood something now. This was not about temporary leverage, the structure was real. The clause was enforceable. And my silence had been intentional. Daniel entered my sitting room that evening without knocking. "You planned this months ago?" "Yes." "Since when?" "Since Cancun." He froze because he hadn't told me about Cancun. "But bank statements do." Vanessa stepped into the room slowly. "You were auditing us." "I was protecting myself." Daniel exhaled sharply. "You don't trust us." I looked at him steadily. "You stopped behaving trustworthily." Vanessa's voice sharpened. "You're humiliating us." "No," I replied. "I'm limiting exposure." Daniel sat heavily in the chair across from me. "What will make you deactivate the review?" I watched him carefully. "Sign the agreement. And if we do, the trust stabilizes." Vanessa narrowed her eyes. "And you stay, for now." Daniel looked at Vanessa. And in that glance was something new, not partnership, not unity, calculation, because Daniel is beginning to realize something else. The house, the collateral, the trust, it isn't just about me, it's about his reputation. And Vanessa thrives on image. If word spread that Daniel misrepresented asset control, it would not be flattering. 3 days passed without a decision. But tension thickened. Daniel made more calls. Vanessa spent more time scrolling quietly. Isabella avoided dinner conversations. Liam and Mason asked fewer questions, and I waited, because time is leverage when you are prepared. Then, on Friday afternoon, Daniel walked into the kitchen with papers in his hand. Unsigned, he placed them on the table. "This doesn't feel like family," he said quietly. "Neither did the ultimatum," I replied. Vanessa's jaw tightened. "You're never going to let that go?" "No," Daniel looked exhausted. "Mom, if I sign this, what happens next?" I folded my hands. "If you sign it, we begin again, properly. And if I don't," I held his gaze. "Then you will discover how dependent you truly are." Silence, long, heavy, because Daniel finally understands something critical. He thought he was the provider. He thought he was the foundation. He thought I was temporary. But the foundation was always the trust. And the trust was always mine. He doesn't know one more detail yet. One final layer Harold inserted after George passed. A clause that activates if coercion can be proven. And Vanessa's recorded remarks at that dinner, "Your job is simple. Leave if you don't like it." Those words are preserved. Not emotionally, legally, I haven't used them yet. But if Daniel refuses to sign, the next conversation won't happen at this table. It will happen in Harold's office, with witnesses. And once that begins, the power shift won't be quiet anymore. And Daniel is about to decide which version of this story he prefers. The calm correction or the public correction. He thinks this is about pride. It isn't, it's about permanence. And permanence favors the prepared. The morning after the dinner felt almost peaceful. That's what unsettled me. Daniel left early for work. Vanessa moved through the kitchen in soft, careful motions, her tone unusually neutral. The twins argued over cereal like nothing in the world had shifted. Isabella watched me once, just once, with a look that said she knew better. I made coffee the way George used to, slow, measured, letting the aroma fill the kitchen before anyone spoke. No one mentioned what had happened at dinner, but everyone was calculating, especially me. 3 weeks before that dinner, I had already sensed something was wrong. Numbers have a rhythm. And when that rhythm changes, you don't feel it in your eyes. You feel it in your bones. I had been reviewing bank statements late one night in my small bedroom, the one at the end of the hall that used to store seasonal decorations before I arrived. Daniel had insisted it was temporary. Vanessa had smiled and said it was cozy. Cozy doesn't describe a room where you don't belong. I noticed withdrawals that didn't align with my spending habits. Small at first, then larger. Transfers labeled vaguely, joint utilities, family contribution, household upgrades. I never authorized shared control, but Daniel had once asked me to simplify online access so he could help manage things. I had allowed limited viewing privileges. Viewing, not transferring, someone had upgraded permissions. Quietly, that night, instead of confronting him, I called Harold Bennett. Harold has a voice that never rushes. He doesn't react, he absorbs. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said gently, "send me everything." So I did, every statement, every authorization change, every digital access log. Within 48 hours, Harold called me back. "Your son increased access rights using secondary verification," he explained. "Technically not criminal, ethically questionable. And reversible?" I asked. "Immediately, we reversed them, but I didn't tell Daniel, not yet. Instead, Harold and I did something else. We moved what remained. Quietly, the majority of my liquid savings transferred into a protected trust vehicle George and I had established decades ago but never activated. The structure required dual professional oversight, mine and Harold's. No one else, not even Daniel. The old accounts remained open, but hollowed. A decoy tree with roots already transplanted. That was 3 weeks ago. Which brings us back to the morning after dinner. Vanessa cleared plates with forced calm. "So," she said lightly, "are we really discussing rent now?" "Yes," I replied gently. Daniel didn't look up from his phone. "It's unnecessary, Mom." "I disagree." Silence. I took a sip of coffee. "If I am an employee," I continued calmly, "then we should discuss compensation." Vanessa's hand froze midair. "I never said you were an employee." "No," I said softly. "Daniel did." He finally looked up. "You're twisting this." "I'm clarifying it." The twins were quiet now. Isabella's fork hovered above her plate. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "What exactly are you trying to do?" he asked. "I'm auditing," I replied. The word landed heavily. Daniel's jaw tightened. "There's nothing to audit." "Then you won't mind transparency." Vanessa exchanged a glance with him, a flicker, fast. They had rehearsed unity before, but something had shifted since dinner. "You've been using my accounts," I said evenly, "without full disclosure." Daniel laughed once, sharp. "We've been covering household costs. With my money, you live here. I own the property." Vanessa interjected smoothly. "Gloria, this feels hostile." "No," I replied calmly. "Hostile would be calling authorities. I am simply restructuring." Daniel's eyes flickered just slightly. "Restructuring what?" "Access." The word hung in the air. He stood up slowly. "What did you do?" I met his gaze without blinking. "Exactly what you did." For a second, something like uncertainty crossed his face. He reached for his phone. I continued speaking. "You'll find that joint permissions have been adjusted." Daniel froze. Vanessa stepped closer to him. "What does that mean?" she whispered. "It means," I said gently, "that no one touches what isn't theirs." Daniel's face went pale. "You moved the funds." "Yes, how much?" "All of it." Silence, thick, electric. Vanessa's voice sharpened. "You can't just do that." "I can," I replied softly. "It is mine." Daniel's hands trembled slightly, not rage, fear. "When?" he asked. 3 weeks ago." His eyes widened. 3 weeks, yes. "Before dinner." He stared at me as if recalculating every recent interaction. "You planned this." "No," I said calmly. "I prepared." Vanessa stepped forward. "This is retaliation." "It is protection." Daniel's breathing quickened. "You think we're stealing from you?" "I think you became comfortable." "That's insane." "Is it?" I placed a folder on the table, printed statements, authorization logs, dates, numbers. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to, he knew. Vanessa's composure began to crack. "You're trying to destabilize us." "I am stabilizing myself." Daniel's voice lowered. "You don't trust me." I held his gaze. "I trusted you." That silence hurt him more than accusation. He ran a hand through his hair. "What do you want?" "Accountability." "For what?" "For treating me as infrastructure." Vanessa crossed her arms. So what now, you leave and punish us? I leave, I said calmly, because you told me to. Daniel flinched. You took that literally? I take words seriously. The twins shifted uncomfortably. Isabella looked at me, eyes sharp. Are you actually leaving? She asked quietly. Yes, Vanessa scoffed. And where will you go? I smiled gently. That's already arranged. Daniel's head snapped up. Arranged how? I do not make emotional decisions without logistics. He looked shaken. You're bluffing. I reached into my purse and placed a single key on the table. To what? Vanessa demanded. My apartment. Silence detonated in the room. Daniel stared at the key like it had teeth. You signed a lease 2 weeks ago. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. You've been planning this behind our backs? I have been planning my independence. Vanessa's voice rose. This is insane. You move in, help for months, then suddenly, I did not move in, I corrected softly. I was installed. The room went still again. Daniel looked at the floor, then back at me. You're blowing this up. No, I said quietly, you did at dinner. He had no reply. I stood slowly. This conversation is not finished, I said calmly. Daniel looked up sharply. What does that mean? It means there are additional adjustments. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. What adjustments? I paused deliberately. The property title review is complete. Daniel's face drained of color. What property title review? I met his gaze steadily. You assumed permanence. Silence. Long, heavy. Daniel whispered, Mom, what did you do? I smiled gently. You'll find out. And I walked out of the kitchen, because the real shift had only just begun, and what Daniel didn't yet understand was that this was never about rent. It was about control. And control, once reclaimed, doesn't return quietly. Daniel did not go to work the next morning. I knew because I heard him pacing before sunrise, footsteps back and forth across hardwood floors, phone calls in low, urgent tones, Vanessa whispering sharply behind the bedroom door. When someone who believes they are in control realizes they are not, they do not sleep well. I brewed coffee at 5:15, the way George used to, measured, unhurried. I had learned long ago that calm unsettles people more than anger ever could. Daniel appeared in the kitchen wearing yesterday's clothes. You spoke to a lawyer, he said without greeting. Yes, how long? Long enough. Vanessa entered moments later, perfectly dressed, hair smoothed, expression controlled. You're scaring the children, she said coolly. No, I replied. The uncertainty is. Daniel placed a folder on the table. I checked the county records. I said nothing. The house is in a trust. Yes. Since when? Since last month. Vanessa's composure cracked slightly. You transferred it without telling us? I secured it. Daniel's voice sharpened. Mom, I have lived here for 10 years, and I purchased it. He inhaled sharply. You can't just. I can, I interrupted gently. It was always mine. The trust, established with Harold Bennett, had one clear clause. Occupancy did not equal ownership. Contributions did not equal entitlement. And any financial misuse involving my assets triggered protective measures. Daniel stared at me. You think we're trying to take your house? I think you were planning for the possibility. Vanessa stepped forward. That's paranoid. Is it? I asked softly. I watched Daniel's reaction, not anger, calculation, because he knew I was right. 3 weeks ago, when I had met with Harold, we did not only move funds. We had reviewed everything. Property titles, digital access, beneficiary designations, insurance policies, even my will. And for the first time in decades, I had removed default assumptions. No automatic inheritance, no unexamined transfer, everything now conditional. Daniel sank into a chair. You blindsided us. No, I said calmly. You underestimated me. Silence. Isabella appeared in the doorway, unnoticed at first. Dad, she said quietly. He looked up. Are we moving? The question sliced through the room. Vanessa answered quickly. No. Of course not. But Daniel hesitated, and that hesitation told Isabella everything. I spoke gently. No one is being forced out. Choices are simply becoming clear. Daniel looked at me sharply. What choices? You may stay, I said, under revised agreements. Vanessa crossed her arms. Which are market rent, shared utility contributions, written occupancy contract. Daniel's face hardened. You're treating us like tenants? Yes, Vanessa laughed bitterly. You'd charge your own son? You charged your own mother, I replied quietly. The room went silent. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's not fair. No, I said softly. It wasn't. He stood abruptly. This is about that stupid dinner. No, I answered calmly. That was merely the reveal. Vanessa's voice rose. You're punishing us? I am restructuring. Daniel ran his hands over his face. You don't trust us? I paused. I trust patterns. He looked at me, then really looked at me. What if we agree, he asked cautiously. To what? To rent, contracts, whatever you want. Vanessa turned sharply toward him. You're agreeing to this? I'm asking, he snapped. She stared at him as if he had betrayed her. I watched the fracture form. Interesting, because when unity cracks, truth leaks through. If you agree, I said gently, then we begin fresh. And if we don't, Vanessa asked, then you begin independent. Daniel exhaled slowly. You've already signed the apartment lease. Yes, so you're leaving either way. Yes. The finality in that word landed heavier than any accusation. Vanessa's voice dropped. You think we can't manage without you? I think you've avoided learning how. Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and went pale. What? Vanessa demanded. He didn't answer immediately. I already knew. Harold had scheduled the formal documentation to be delivered this morning. Certified mail, official, unmistakable. Daniel swallowed. It's from Whitmore and Associates. Vanessa looked at me. You had papers sent here? Yes. Daniel opened the email attachment with trembling fingers. I watched his eyes move rapidly across the screen. Effective immediately, he muttered. He looked up at me. You froze the joint line of credit? Yes, that's how we pay. I know. Vanessa's breathing quickened. You can't cut us off. I did not cut you off, I replied calmly. I removed myself. Daniel's voice lowered dangerously. You're destroying us? No, I said softly. I am removing my subsidy. Silence pressed down on the kitchen like a physical weight. Isabella stepped fully into the room now. You lied, she said quietly to her father. Daniel flinched. About what? About Grandma's money? Vanessa snapped. This is not your conversation. It is if it affects where we live, Isabella shot back. I remained silent, because sometimes the most powerful move is to allow truth to unfold without interference. Daniel sank into a chair again. This was supposed to be temporary, he muttered. It was, I said. Then why escalate? Because temporary became assumed. Vanessa looked at me with something new in her eyes, not anger, fear. You're serious, she whispered. Yes. Daniel stared at the key on the counter, the one to my apartment. You've already packed. Yes, and you didn't tell us. I wasn't required to. The twins entered the kitchen, sensing tension. Are we in trouble? Liam asked. Daniel forced a smile. No, buddy, but his voice lacked conviction. I knelt gently beside the boys. No one is in trouble, I said softly. We are simply learning how to take care of ourselves. Noah frowned. Are you leaving, Grandma? Yes. When? Soon. The boys clung to me instinctively, and for a brief moment I allowed myself to feel it. The weight of what separation costs. Then I stood, because clarity requires strength. Daniel looked at me one last time. What do you actually want from me? He asked. I met his eyes. I want you to become the man you pretend to be. Silence, deep, unavoidable. Vanessa looked between us, recalculating again. Harold is coming this afternoon, isn't he? Daniel asked quietly. Yes, to do what? To finalize? He swallowed. Finalize what? I held his gaze. Everything. And as the morning light spilled across the kitchen table, Daniel finally understood something. This was never emotional, it was structural. And structures, once reinforced, do not collapse easily. But the real consequence? He still didn't know it yet. And when he did, it would be too late to undo. Harold Bennett arrived at exactly 2:00 p.m. He did not rush. He did not frown. He did not posture. Men like Harold never needed to. He carried a slim leather briefcase and the kind of quiet that unsettles loud people. Vanessa opened the door before Daniel could reach it. Yes, she said sharply. Harold Bennett, he replied evenly. I have an appointment with Mrs. Gloria Whittaker. Vanessa hesitated just long enough to betray that she hadn't expected him to actually show up. I'm right here, I said from the living room. Harold stepped inside and nodded politely to everyone, but his eyes met mine first. Calm, ready? Daniel remained standing near the dining table, arms crossed. This is unnecessary, he said. Harold set his briefcase down. That depends on perspective. Vanessa forced a tight smile. Is this about the trust? Yes, Daniel inhaled sharply. You blindsided us, Mom. No, I corrected gently. I formalized reality. Harold opened his case and laid several documents across the table. Occupancy agreement, financial separation addendum, asset protection confirmation. I watched Daniel read the titles. His confidence thinned with every page. You're serious, he muttered again. Yes, Harold spoke calmly. These documents clarify that Mrs. Whittaker's assets are legally separated from any household obligations. Any shared use of property must now be contractually defined. Vanessa's tone sharpened. She's our mother, this is ridiculous. Harold did not react. Family relationships do not override financial liability. Daniel flipped to the second page. You're charging us retroactively? No, I said quietly. I am correcting forward. He looked at the numbers, market rent adjusted modestly, shared utilities, clear deadlines. This is humiliating, Vanessa whispered. I tilted my head slightly. No, it is adult. Silence. Isabella lingered near the staircase listening. Daniel looked up at Harold. What happens if we don't sign? Harold closed his folder slightly. Then the occupancy becomes unauthorized effective 30 days from notice. Vanessa turned to me sharply. You'd evict us? I would not, I said calmly. The contract would. Daniel's hands trembled faintly, not with rage. With realization, because now it wasn't a fight, it was math, and math does not argue. Vanessa stepped closer to Daniel. We shouldn't sign anything. And where do we go? He shot back quietly. She hesitated. He looked at me. You've thought this through? Yes. How long? Long enough. He stared at the pages again. You were planning to leave even before the dinner, weren't you? Yes. Vanessa's head snapped toward me. You used that dinner as an excuse. No, I replied softly. You revealed yourselves. Harold cleared his throat gently. I'll step outside for 10 minutes. You may discuss privately. He gathered his briefcase and walked onto the porch. The room felt smaller without his presence. Daniel paced. Vanessa whispered harshly, This is emotional blackmail. It's legal protection, he replied. She's trying to control us. Daniel stopped pacing. No. She's removing herself. Vanessa looked at him, shocked. You're siding with her? I'm recognizing reality. I remained seated, still, watching because pressure exposes fractures. Isabella stepped fully into the room. You should sign, she said quietly. Both parents turned toward her. You don't understand, Vanessa snapped. I understand enough, Isabella replied calmly. Grandma paid for more than you ever told us. Daniel froze. Who told you that? Isabella held his gaze. I can read bank statements too. Silence. Thick, uncomfortable, Vanessa's voice lowered. You went through our documents? No, Isabella said softly. I went through Grandma's. Daniel looked at me. You involved her? No, I answered gently. I respected her intelligence. That landed harder than any accusation because Daniel knew he had underestimated more than just me. Vanessa sank into a chair. This is unbelievable. Daniel stared at the papers again. If we sign, he asked slowly, you won't pursue anything else? I folded my hands calmly. I have already separated finances. I have no intention of escalating unless boundaries are crossed again. Vanessa looked up sharply. What does that mean? It means, I said gently, this is your last assumption. Daniel inhaled deeply. He picked up the pen. Vanessa grabbed his wrist. Think, he looked at her. I am. She searched his face for defiance. Instead, she found calculation and exhaustion. Finally, she released his hand. Daniel signed. Vanessa hesitated longer, but she signed too. The scratch of pen on paper sounded louder than it should have. Permanent. Harold re-entered precisely on cue. He reviewed the signatures. All in order, he said. Daniel looked at him. What happens now? Harold closed his briefcase. Now you become responsible. He nodded to me. Mrs. Whittaker? And then he left just like that. No raised voices, no courtroom, no drama, just documentation. Daniel remained seated. Vanessa stared at the table. I stood slowly. I'll be leaving this evening. Daniel's head lifted. You don't have to rush. Yes, I said softly. I do. The twins entered the room again, sensing the shift. Are you going now? Liam asked. I knelt and hugged them. I'll still see you, I said gently, but you'll learn to wake up without me. Noah's eyes filled with tears. I don't want to. I know. Daniel watched quietly. Something in his face had changed. Not anger, not entitlement. Recognition. You really planned all of this, he said. Yes. And you didn't tell me. You didn't ask. Vanessa stood abruptly. You think you've won. I looked at her calmly. This was never a competition, she scoffed. You've turned your own son into a tenant. No, I corrected gently. He turned himself into one the moment he treated me like staff. Silence again. Daniel finally stood. When are you moving the rest of your things? Most of it is already gone. His eyes widened slightly. When? Over the last 2 weeks. He looked around the room, suddenly noticing what was missing. Subtle absences, financial files. Personal documents, small valuables. God, he muttered. Yes, I said quietly. That's what you should have remembered sooner. Vanessa walked away without another word. Daniel approached me slowly. I didn't think you'd actually leave. I know, he swallowed. What do we tell people? I smiled faintly. The truth. And what's that? That your mother decided to retire. He nodded slowly. That word landed differently now. Retire. Not from life, from obligation. I picked up my coat. Isabella stepped forward and hugged me tightly. Are you okay? She whispered. Yes. Are you really? Yes. She pulled back and studied my face. You're not sad. I am, I admitted softly, but sadness does not equal weakness. Daniel opened the front door for me for the first time in months. He looked at me as I stepped onto the porch. Mom, I turned. I'm not your enemy. I know, I replied gently, but I'm not your safety net anymore either. He nodded slowly, and as I walked down the steps, I realized something. The real power shift wasn't the contract, it wasn't the trust. It wasn't even the money, it was this. Daniel finally understood I could walk away. And once someone realizes you are capable of leaving, they never see you the same way again. But what Daniel still didn't understand was what would happen when his lifestyle collided with his actual income. And that collision was coming sooner than he thought. 3 weeks, that's how long it took. 3 weeks after I walked out of that house, after Daniel signed his name to responsibility, after Vanessa swallowed her pride and called it temporary restructuring. 3 weeks before the illusion cracked. I was in my new apartment when the first crack sounded. Not literal, financial. I had chosen a modest place 10 minutes away. Small kitchen, 2 windows, east-facing light, quiet. Ruth Ellison helped me unpack. Harold Bennett ensured everything was transferred properly, every account separated, every document sealed. For the first time in months, I slept without listening for children calling my name at dawn. Retirement, it turns out, is quiet. But silence doesn't mean detachment, it just means clarity. The phone rang at 8:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. Daniel, I let it ring twice, then I answered. Yes, his voice was tight. Mom, can we talk? We are, he exhaled sharply. This isn't funny. I'm not laughing. There was a pause. The mortgage payment bounced. I leaned back in my chair. I see, you see, he snapped. That's it, you signed the agreement. Vanessa's voice floated faintly in the background. Put her on speaker. Daniel didn't. Expenses are stacking up, he continued. Utilities, school fees, the car lease. You removed the nanny budget, I said calmly. We didn't have a nanny. You had me. Silence, that silence again, the one he hates. Mom, this isn't sustainable. No, I agreed. It isn't. Then what do you expect us to do? Adjust. He ran a hand through his hair. I could hear it in his breath. You can't just detach. I didn't detach, I replied softly. I rebalanced. He lowered his voice. Vanessa thinks you did this to teach us a lesson. I let that sit. Then I said, I did this to stop teaching the wrong one. There it was, that sting. He exhaled slowly. You're really not coming back, are you? No. Another long silence. Then, we may need to sell the house. That one hurt him, I could hear it. Because the house was status, it was image, it was the proof that he had made it. I'm sorry, I said quietly. For what? For the illusion. The next crack came 2 days later. Isabella showed up at my door. She didn't knock loudly. She never does. She just stood there when I opened it, backpack slung over one shoulder. Can I come in? Always. She sat at my kitchen table and looked older than 17. They're fighting. I poured her tea. About money, about everything. She stared into her cup. Dad's angry all the time now. Mom keeps saying this is your fault. And what do you think? She looked up at me. I think they were fine as long as you absorbed the pressure. That child, she sees too much. They're talking about refinancing, she added. Or selling. Dad said something about credit cards. I nodded. I warned him about debt years ago. Did he listen? No, she leaned back. Are you going to help? That question, heavy, real, I met her eyes. No, she didn't look surprised. I didn't think so. We sat quietly. Then she asked softly, does it hurt? Yes. Then why don't you fix it? Because sometimes fixing it means breaking yourself. She absorbed that, and I saw it. The moment she understood, that love without boundaries becomes self-erasure. The third crack came publicly. Vanessa's social media posts changed. No more travel photos, no more restaurant shots, no more filtered perfection. Instead, sometimes family lets you down when you need them most. Cryptic. Strategic, victim-coded. Ruth called me that afternoon. She's implying abandonment. I know. Are you going to respond? No. Why not? Because truth doesn't argue with performance. 2 weeks later, the house went on the market. Isabella told me first. They staged it, she said. They even removed some of the pictures of you. I smiled faintly. Of course they did. The twins struggled. Liam cried at school. Mason started acting out. Daniel blamed stress. Vanessa blamed me, but I didn't rush in. I didn't offer rescue. I didn't soften, because this wasn't about punishment. It was about gravity, actions, consequences. Physics doesn't negotiate. One evening, Daniel showed up unannounced. He stood outside my apartment door looking smaller, not physically, but internally. Can I come in? Yes. He stepped inside and glanced around. It's simple. Yes, you seem calm. I am. He sank into the chair opposite me. We're selling, I heard. He nodded. We'll move into something smaller. That's wise. He swallowed. I miscalculated. I know. His jaw tightened. I didn't think you'd actually walk. I know. And I didn't think it would collapse this fast. I folded my hands. Daniel, you built your stability on unpaid labor and borrowed money. He looked down. I thought it was temporary. So did I. That hit. He looked up again. I didn't mean to disrespect you. You did. Silence. I just assumed. Yes. That word hung between us. Assumption, the quiet killer of gratitude. He leaned back and stared at the ceiling. I keep thinking about that dinner. So do I. I was angry. You were entitled. He closed his eyes. Mom, yes. Did you plan everything before that night? I considered the truth. Yes. How long? Long enough. He exhaled sharply. So when you said perfect, I meant it. He gave a short, humorless laugh. That's when the power shifted. Yes. He nodded slowly. I didn't see it. I know. He stood to leave. At the door he paused. I don't know how to fix this. You don't. He frowned. What does that mean? It means you don't fix it with money or apologies. Then how? You rebuild yourself. He stared at me. That's it. That's everything. He left quieter than he arrived, and that was the final crack. Because what finally collapsed wasn't the house. It wasn't the mortgage. It wasn't the lifestyle. It was Daniel's belief that I would always cushion his fall. A month later, the house sold. They downsized. No more staged dinners. No more curated perfection, just reality. Isabella still visits. The twins still hug me tightly when I see them. Vanessa avoids eye contact. Daniel speaks carefully now, measured, aware, and me. I wake up each morning without urgency, without obligation, without being someone's invisible support beam. I sit by my window with coffee. I balance my own accounts. I choose my own schedule. And sometimes I think back to that dinner, the moment he said, "Your job is simple," and I smiled. Because here's the truth they never saw coming. When you remove the person who has been silently holding everything together, you don't weaken them. You expose yourself, and once exposed, you either grow up or you collapse. I chose growth. They chose assumption. And assumption is the most expensive mistake Daniel Whitaker ever made.